need to be close to the action, all making them particularly vulnerable. Legal restrictions such as security law, data protection law also prevent them from doing their jobs. What can be done to lessen these risks and limitations? So I hope during this hour, or maybe a bit longer, Juklan said we could maybe use 10 minutes longer. It depends how much questions and discussion it would be. We will get to know the four panelists better, who they are and what problems they have been met while doing their job as photojournalists in Europe. I will give you a short presentation and each of you, the panelists, get around 5 minutes to share their stories before we open up for questions or stories experienced from all of you. To do that, put your hand up or write questions in the chat, and then we, at the end of this session, we can go through the questions. And hopefully we will end up with some good practice from different countries and some suggestions or solutions to the people in the unions or EFJ. First of all, let us get to know the panelists better. The real experts of these issues are the journalists that are out in the fields, that meet the challenge, or let us call it by the correct word, meet the problems, harassment, and danger while doing their job. And first man in the panel is Markus Pentikainen. He is a freelance photojournalist and lecturer working in Helsinki, Finland. He has got a degree in photojournalism, and he has been working for traditional Finnish weekly news magazine as a photographer and a photo editor for almost 20 years. My question was, have you ever been at risk? But that is a stupid question because that's why you are here. So we are interested to listen to how, when, and why. So Markus, I give you the microphone.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. I will show you actually some photos just to see something from already 15 years ago. And if I press share now, are you able to see this topic line? It goes all the way back to 2006 when I was working for this traditional and rather conservative Finnish weekly magazine. And there was a so-called Asia-Europe summit in Helsinki. And at that time, there were many other examples where big riots have erupted in connection with those big international summits. And now this was also accepted to happen in Finland, at least by police and media was waiting for that reaction. And I was asked to document what would happen in that night in Helsinki, and I will show you some photos. And this is also the journey where I ended up to standing in this chair for having my 30 seconds for this big court. And also to mention, all the captions in these images are from the ECHR judgment. They are quoted straight from there, so they're not my invention. So it was beginning of September 2006, and there was this police cordon already happening in the center of Helsinki, and there was rather harmless demonstration of 50, many of them anarchists and many of them bystanders, and almost same amount of journalists and maybe even 500 bystanders who were just came by to see what's going to happen. And according to this judgment, there was 480 police and border guard officers, and they were taking this event very seriously. There was some bottles, stones, and jars filled with paint were thrown, and police considered at that moment that this event had turned into a riot. It was of a carnivalistic type of riot, but still legally it was riot from that on. And they announced it that the demonstration was to be stopped, and they were starting to apprehend violent demonstrators. And at that moment, media was let to do their work quite easily, and it was like 2-3 hours time where police was just tightening their cordon and asking people to leave the scene. And this photo is from the outside of the area where I was working, and from the so-called official press point where police was what police was offering for the press people to follow their demonstration, and everything was happening behind these buses next to this modern art museum. So this was impossible for other press people to follow what was happening. And whole downtown area was fenced, and this was where everything was concentrated. And night went on. Police established exit routes, and they were emptying the area, and people were asked to show their identities. And in that moment, I was also showing my identity to police, and I was let to stay on scene and photograph freely. That moment, what happened. At this point, there started to be some violent apprehensions. Police was really willing to end the demonstration, and that moment my employer said that stay there as long as possible. And altogether 128 persons were taken into custody. And the basic question, to stay or not to stay. I show this very shortly, but this Grand Chamber judgment, they said that any attempt to remove journalists from the scene of demonstrations must therefore be subject of strict scrutiny. And journalists are thought that they are working in good faith to provide accurate and reliable information in accordance with the tenets of responsible journalism. And that's something what would be interesting to discuss later. That's me 16 years or 15 years ago. And that moment I had already get this wish and order from my employer that stay there as long as possible. And after that, I made clear to the police nearby that I'm there as a working professional. And I had this equipment of that time, which quite easily recognized me as well as a professional. This was the cover of the magazine that was published 1 week later. And for the end of my part, I'm just asking the question of what is this responsible journalism, or do we have to be like outlaw journalists? And this concept of responsible journalism was really introduced in my court case in the Grand Chamber level. And they said in this decision that those legal sanctions, they could hardly, if at all, have any chilling effect on persons taking in part in protest actions as a professionals. And I think for me, this 9 years court case, it had some chilling effect for my future decisions, how to proceed in similar situations. And maybe this is too long for this, but I think still we need to discuss also that why all these 9 years in a court, why this was important. And this dissenting opinion of one of the judges that this chamber judgment was a missed opportunity for the court to reinforce like press freedom in similar situations. And they were really pointing out that press had to be more and more recognizable in these events, maybe wearing those press vests or other similar clothing. But as we have seen in recent years, this kind of clothing, it might be also a risk from the other side of the demonstrators. So this is also the part of discussion. So how recognizable we should be there. And actually, this is my last one. This is where the freedom of press ends. This was the last picture I took. Policies already keeping me, and I just had able to press the shutter one more time. And this was my introduction, and I leave for Oddrun, and let's discuss more later.
Thank you very much, Markus. That was many good questions that you started, and I hope people are noting questions and sharing it in the chat, so we have something to discuss after we have gone through all the 4 panelists. And now I will give the word to Sitara Talia Ambrosio from Germany. She works as a freelance photographer and multimedia journalist. Her work currently focuses on migration, human rights, and the issue of climate change. Some of her projects are self-published. She integrates parts of her work into educational work in the form of multimedia presentations. And I must say, after listening to Anna Gordon yesterday, when she said something about so many women studying photojournalism and so few are being able to live as a photojournalist, doing that work. So, Sitara, I look forward to listen to your stories.
Yeah, first of all, thank you. And yeah, my part today is to talk about gender-specific violence. And I think that when we talk about risk in photojournalism, we must also consider those risks that are caused because of our gender. And yeah, I'm much more exposed to sexual assault as a woman. And this is exactly why it is so important to talk about the experience of women and queer people in our industry and to listen to those effects. And yeah, what are the risks in face of my job because of my gender? So first of all, I would like to say that there are many factors that make it difficult to work in this industry as a woman. It is with the fact that women getting less bookings than male colleagues, so we are definitely underrepresented. And now you might think that this effect is not a direct risk, but of course, earning money plays a big role in the kind of security you have. So we as journalists, we're working in a high-risk area, know how important it is to be well secured. So this is also a question of money. And yeah, also my own online presentation on my website plays a role. I and also female colleagues who are friends experience sexual harassment online. This can go so far that I decided a few weeks ago to take portraits of myself off the website. And also offensive messages via my public number are a problem. So I was afraid that photos of me would be abused. So yeah, the main thing is to make the experience that the more successful you are in your job, these things increase with the increasing publicity of your person. And yeah, sexual violence is a constant companion, but not only in the internet. So to clarify what I'm trying to talking about, some examples. I was working on a larger story with a male college 1 or 2 months ago. And while my colleague interviewed one person without any problems, and I photographed another. And after I took the photos, the protagonist tried to kiss me. And even after I say no 5 or 6 times, he still tried. And I resist, of course, and he luckily then he let go of me. So I must stop the story I want to tell with the person together. And my colleague would not have noticed it at all. He feels safe all the time. Of course, he did not mean any harms by his carelessness. He simply has no experience with this kind of situation. So to this day, I wonder how we could have prevented this assault. This experience are by no means individual. It is a structural problem, which is of course also represented in our industry. And yeah, and also with all the things I said, we should not forget that colleagues can also be offenders. And the problem already starts way before physical, sexual assault or harassment. And yeah, also even speaking up against this attack can put me in another sexist situation, because speaking out as a woman, queer person, or in my case as a young woman, can lead to the simple not being taken serious. I mean, how should we even feel safe by speaking up in an industry that is mostly dominated by men? So when an industry is so dominated by men, toxic culture towards women is a logical result. So the police, editors, directors often turn a blind eyes into this, or they maybe downplay how serious they cases are. And what is the point of reporting harassment when no one is listening? And yeah, apart from our job, it is already an external topic how difficult it is to report sexual assault and to get legal help. And in my job, it is usually not even an option. So too often, like many others, I experience poor restriction from the police. So we hear it before. And I had a very traumatic experience doing a demonstration in Leipzig. So the police used water cannons to stop people throwing stones. And I photographed the scenes, and apparently I was in the way of a police officer. And while passing by, he shouted to me, "Stupid gun, got out of my way." And surely there are always cases where the reporters are blocked, insulted, or even imprisoned. But I mean, this is a gender-specific insult. So this made me feel less safe in dealing with police authority. And yeah, so the next step is to come to the German unions and how they deal with it. And I am a member of the German Journalists Union, DJU, at Verdi. And they documented cases of such violence against journalists, of course. But however, so far there's no concrete gender-specific support from their side. And I had a call before the meeting with them, and now talks are being planned. Yeah, and the next topic is what had to change. So is it possible to speak now about this, or is it later in the call?
Thank you very much. I thought maybe every one of you could just share the case you want to talk about, and then afterwards we can say what can be done and who should do it. But you have been addressing very important cases. So, and also things are happening now because you raise your voice. And Ricardo said yesterday, report the cases. And it's not only the women that should do that. So if you can just keep the solution for the next round.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I would present Boris. I don't know if he's on. Is he, Jukland? Can you nod if he's on, Boris?
Yes, he's
Yes.
in the room.
Good, thank you.
I think he
Okay.
will be speaking in Montenegrin, so we have to switch to English if you have not switched the interpretation yet.
Yeah, so then you go down to the interpretation icon and put it on English. I do it now. Just a short about Boris Pejovic from Montenegro. He gained his first experience in journalistic photography in an independent daily newspaper. In 2005, he cooperated with a German press agency for which he still works today. And also his photos have been used in many advertising and political campaigns through cooperation with political parties, the non-governmental sector and businesses. So nice to see you, Boris, and I'll leave you the microphone. Okay, the word is yours.
Hvala. Hvala. Ja ću, kod nas su problemi više struki u odnosu na kompletan region. Položaj fotoreportera u Crnoj Gori je izuzetno loš po svim aspektima, mnogo gori nego kod novinara. Mi dijelimo iste probleme koji dijele i novinari, plus imamo specifične probleme koje su vezane samo za našu struku. Položaj fotoreportera, kao što rekoh, jako je loš. Tu se radi o tome da je uzrokovan dugogodišnjim decenijskim, čak od više decenija, zanemarivanjem i diskriminacijom profesije, napadima na fotoreportere, koji su, kad su napadi u pitanju, posebno mi trpimo slične prijetnje i napade kao i novinari, ali što je specifično kad su napadi za fotoreportere bitni, mi trpimo svakodnevne sitne napade tokom rada. U toku radnog vremena mi trpimo razne napade od tipa ako morate da radite sa obezbeđenjem neke institucije, nismo dobro došli ni kod obezbeđenja, maltretira vas ako hoćete da fotografišete banku ili nešto ispred banke, tu je obezbeđenje da vas maltretira. Taj problem i dalje nije riješen. Ako pokušate ispred zgrade neke državne institucije da nešto napravite, i tu imate problem s obezbeđenjem. Javne manifestacije, takođe isto, protesti, to ću tek posebno, ali ovo su neki sitni problemi u koje hoću da kažem da kod nas postoje mentalitetski problemi po pitanju naše profesije, prihvatanja naše profesije. Kao što radni naziv kaže, fotografija govori više od 1000 riječi, to je floskula koju često upotrebljavamo i koja je mnogo puta izgovorena i označava moć izraza i izvještavanja fotografijom, ali mi imamo i drugih problema tipa u Crnoj Gori gdje postoji cenzura fotografije, što mislim da je rijetkost. Mislim da je rijetkost i u mnogim drugim zemljama, posebno ovako bliskoj zemlji Evropi, članici u Evropskoj uniji. Skoro smo imali primjer kod nas da je, to je baš bio očigledan vid cenzure fotografije, kada je premijer pozvao na bezbjednosni sektor vezano za nemire koji su se dogodili skoro oko crkve, oko problema crkve kojima smo trenutno izloženi. Došlo je do polarizacije političke scene, podizanje nacionalističkih strasti u kojima je veliki broj, to se direktno odrazuje, ljudi su dosta, izvinjavam se sekundu, da, polarizacija je, ja se izvinjavam, polarizacija je tolika u društvu da mi imamo nacionalističke probleme, Srbi, Crnogorci, ne znam što, tu je došlo do kulminacije i do nemira koje smo mi pratili, ali o tome ću malo kasnije. Htio sam da se nadovežem na premijera, vezano za tu situaciju. Premijer je organizovao sastanak sa bezbjednosnim sektorom. zabranio je fotografisanje toga skupa, nego su dostavili fotografije, dostavili su svoje fotografije u kojima su izostavili potpredsjednika vlade zbog njihovih nekih unutrašnjih razmirica. Javnost nije ni bila obavještena da je potpredsjednik vlade i ministar policije i pojedini ljudi iz bezbednosnog sektora prisustvovali tome. Tu se radilo o očiglednoj cenzuri i vlada nije reagovala. Mi smo reagovali, vlada i dan danas nije reagovala. Na mnoge skupove, na mnoge institucije nam je zabranjen pristup. Znači, dostavljaju se fotografije, iz tih mediji ih objavljuju, portali ih objavljuju, mi nemamo pristup i lako se manipuliše događajima, a da mi nemamo uopšte pristupa i slobode da obavljamo svoj posao. Što se tiče cenzure, cenzura je izražena, to je baš bila vidljiva, nevidljive cenzure što se tiče pristupa informacijama i kakvih sličnih njihovih opravdanja gdje ne možemo da prisustvujemo, poput zbog COVID-a ili ne znam što. To su već neki skriveni oblici koji su malo teže dokazivi, ali to je izraženo. Kad je bezbjednost u pitanju, evo konkretno primjer, pošto sam pomenuo belvederi događanja na nacionalnoj osnovi i pitanja Srpske i Crnogorske pravoslavne crkve, gdje je polarizovana kompletna javnost i podijeljene političke strukture polarizovane i to diže tenzije. To se direktno odražava na nas fotoreportere. Kolega Markus je pomenuo da fotoreporteri bi trebali da budu vidno označeni i kod nas, ali u ovom slučaju na kojem sam ja konkretno radio, ja sam morao da skrivam svoj identitet, znači morao sam da se pozivam da radim za Evropsku pres fotoagenciju, ako sam radio možda u tom momentu jesam, ali moje kolege su se isto pozivale da rade za Evropsku pres fotoagenciju, jer strane agencije imaju kod pristalica i jedne i druge strane mnogo veći rejting i ljudi se teže usuđuju da napadaju strance, a domaće medije vrlo lakše napadaju. I tu je bilo toliko polarizovano što se tiče demonstranata da su tražili iz pojedinih medija, raspitivali su ko su, što su, izgovarane su ružne riječi na konto tih medija, tražilo se ko je fotoreporter, ko je novinar. U takvoj situaciji je nemoguće zakačiti prsluk i ići i govoriti, na primer, ja radim za taj i taj medij. Posebno ako radite za portal za koji informacije izlaze u momentu. Znači, u momentu događaja, u roku od par minuta te se informacije pojavljuju, a mi smo mala država sa svega 600.000 ljudi, čiji gradovi iznose 20-30.000 ljudi, gdje se svi manje više prepoznajemo, tako da je malo i teško sakriti identitet, ali ljudi generalno ne znaju za koji medij radite. Tako da iz bezbjednosnih razloga često i novinari i fotoreporteri kod nas znaju da skrivaju za mediji koji rade. Jer su mediji na lošem glasu, jer je pojedina politička partija proglasila taj medij izdajničkim, ovakvim, onakvim na raznorazne načine. Pored, znači, ja sam imao incident kad je bezbjednost u pitanju, ja sam imao incident, evo koleginica je pomenula sa gradonačelnikom, ako sam dobro pomenuo da imaju incident, imao sam i ja davno incident sa gradonačelnikom gdje sam ga na sred ulice nepropisno se parkirao, ja sam fotografirao i on me napao, mene i kolegu je napao. fizički. Naravno, to je imalo sudski epilog i oni su osuđeni, ali nijednog momenta nisu svo vrijeme su bili, gradonačelnik je svo vrijeme bio na funkciji. Kazne su blage bile, od novčane do uslovne. Što je još u svemu tome bitno, to je na što hoću da ukažem da je bezbjednost fotoreportera jako bitna i od opreme koju posjeduje i od mnogih drugih faktora na koje utiče redakcija, a i sama situacija i ekonomska, socioekonomska u zemlji. Ja sam tada fotografisao sa poluispravnim aparatom. Postojala je velika mogućnost da nemam. Te fotografije su kasnije bile dokaz, ali velika mogućnost je postojala da ja te fotografije ne uspijem napraviti. Moje kolege često se suočavaju s time da mi moramo da finansiramo svoju opremu. Većina mojih kolega finansira svoju opremu. Sa veoma niskim platama sa kojima radimo i niskim koeficijentima, zbog čega kažem da smo diskriminisani, ali mogu i kasnije o tome. Veliki broj kolega ne može da priušti sebe onaj dio opreme koji im je potreban. Redakcije nisu zainteresovane, čak dobijamo da nam se redakcije pozivaju na to, na mobilno novinarstvo, kako je mobilno novinarstvo u trendu, pa mi ne moramo da vam kupimo aparat, dovoljno je mobilni telefon kao CNN, BBC, New York Times rade.
Boris?
Da?
Can I say the time is running away, and I realize these topics are so huge, so we cannot solve all the problems today, but I'm sure we will start something for EFJ, because I think every one of you have mentioning things that we cannot stop discussing after this webinar. And also, I'm so happy to see there are so many questions in the chat. That means your people are getting engaged. But can I say thank you very much, Boris, so far, and then give the microphone or the floor to Michael Trammer, so we get to tell something about his experience before we take a round again and go through the questions. And also, I see Yuklon is sharing good, informative web pages that can bring this further. So the next man in the panel is Michael Trammer. He's a freelance journalist based in Hanover in Germany, works with photo, video, and text, prefers investigative, cross and multimedia stories, mostly writes about social movements, social inequality, migration, and group-related enmity. So, and I also see in your presentation that you are studying photojournalism and documentary photography at Hochschule Hannover University of Applied Sciences and Arts. So, Michael, does that mean you are the youngest and a student? I give you the floor.
Hi, well, yes, I do study. I'm Michael, I'm here from Hanover, and yes, right now I am studying at the Hochschule Hannover Photojournalism and Documentary Photography. Before that, I was working as a freelance journalist for an agency, and at some point I decided that I don't want my pictures to run with text that somebody else wrote, so that's why I started to engage more in text writing and try to forge my skills a little bit. And I think the reason, or one of the reasons I was invited, is that at several times, especially when working about social movements, demonstrations and migration, as we have already heard, photojournalists and journalists in general tend to get into difficult situations with either violent people or authorities. So I want to present two examples from the last year or a little bit more than a year that I experienced. In March 2020, when Erdogan announced to when Erdogan announced to open the European border towards Europe, there was a spike in migration, and I was on Lesbos at this time, and I was trying to make a multimedia, or I was producing a multimedia reportage about Moria and the situation there, and like a multi-aspect look on the problems that Lesbos was facing. And I was reporting about a boat that was drifting on the open seas, of refugees that were heading towards Europe. Masked men supposedly cut their power line of their engines, so they were stuck without movement on the ocean, and only the wind and paddling pushed them in. By the time they arrived at the port, there was a huge mob of far-right vigilantes that gathered around 100 to 150 people. Authorities ignored that mob. The Coast Guard even pulled away, left the people there. People, the refugees in the boat, children, women, screaming, crying, were attacked by the mob. And I was taking pictures of that. I was first in the mob. That worked quite well. They ignored me quite a bit. And then I passed on the other side of the pier, trying to show the picture of the mob shouting at the boat on the water. And at that point, 9 or 8 or 7, I'm not sure right now, vigilantes split off. And they cut me off and they smashed me, took my cameras, threw them in the water, and let me bleed on the floor. And that was my first experience, which was quite physical. And then my second experience with authorities is quite young. There was a car show in Munich, the International Car Show, IAA, and a lot of climate justice groups decided to protest against this show. And therefore, a group decided to squat a house. And I was accompanying them during this protest action. And after police rushed into the building and to arrest the protesters that squatted the empty house that was formerly a refugee shelter and owned by the state, but has been empty since many years, police arrested me, and they said, even though I was on assignment, for the Taz, liberal or leftist newspaper from Germany. They said I was an activist, and they treated me as an activist. So I'm accused of trespassing, entering the building without permission from the owner. And so for me, I was taken to the police station. I was processed. This took hours, and I was stopped from reporting anything else that day. Luckily, I was kind of expecting a situation like this as the police stormed the building, and I sent my text to my newspaper before they could arrest me, and sent also my images out. But yeah, if I would not have worked with like precautions, it could have easily happened that my work would not have been able to be printed the next day or be published online. So, and this brings me to the security measures I take before going on a job. I usually have emergency numbers in print in case my phone runs out. All my devices are encrypted. Also, for some actions, I take flashcards that I can destroy in worst case. I encrypt all my other devices, and I try to use encrypted communication whenever I can. And yeah, the protection against bodily violence, like in Lesbos, I would say it's really difficult. In the special case of Lesbos, one reason why I ended up in this situation, because other journalists were also attacked on spot, but they were not hit as heavily as me, was just a bad risk assessment of the situation on site. Going onto the pier without having a way to leave the area was a mistake. And yeah, I calculated risks wrong. In that moment, I decided I want that photo from the pier, even though I knew there would be no way besides the pier back. So in general, I would say the union, the DJU, which I'm a member of, has been a help in a lot of situations. Also in small harassments, there is a monitoring system, and there is representatives of the journalist union that are quite addressable, and they make numbers quite visible. And in the end, I would like to say that for me, what helps me in these situations are solidarity structures, friends and colleagues that catch and support each other in cases of violence and harassment by authorities, far-right vigilantes, or similar stuff. And I think yeah, well, I'm strongly, I would strongly say we need to organize as a union, and we need to organize as journalists, even though we are in competition to mitigate risks. So I will put some links about the work I was talking about in the chat now, and I think, yeah, we can continue with the discussion maybe.
Good, thank you very much. Many good advices there, how to protect your sources, but also are you addressing the unions? I look upon the chat and there are so many good questions, and also I think people are connecting. So I hope after this webinar is over, you will still be connected because this issue, of course, is not ending at this webinar. I had, yes, and also Sitara and the other, you can just share your portfolios, because I think the work you are doing are very important. And also, Marcus, you have done that, and Boris, if you have something to share, and the others, I mean, use the chat active. I was going to ask the next round, what do you think can help you in these kinds of situations that you have been explaining is your different cases? Do you have any suggestions to the unions, or what the society authorities can ought to do to prevent these kinds of experiences? And then I thought I should just give the word free. So if any of your panelists want to say something, I was planning on that first, but then I say the participants are also engaged. So if somebody have good practices from different countries, unions, I think it's about time to share it. And I will try, and I need help from Juklan to see if any of these questions in the chat is one that we should lift up, okay? Because I can't be both sides at the same time. So I give the floor open if somebody has good practices for the unions to work. And I know Boris, Montenegro is not the same as Finland, I guess. Do you want something to say, Boris? I see you. Or anybody else? Marcus?
I can also say that from this European Human Court stage, I was really helped by the local journalist union and also the European Federation of Journalists. So this 5 years time from 2010 until 2015, I got very much support from the local journalist union, all lawyer from there, and also some legal support from EFJ specialists. So thank you very much for that work.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. Let me see. As I said, I think the people at EFJ would note what has been discussing here, and also look upon the chat, and would do more actions later, because the four of you have so different cases. It's almost impossible to how would you say it, collect it and give one answer how to solve it. Let me see. Do I have any questions that we could lift up?
Yanis is raising his hand.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Odrun. Firstly, I need to tell that I really like all the contributions a lot. I think it's extremely useful material coming from different places. But I actually have a question, not just to you, Marcus, but you are the one who mentioned it, among other things, about the so-called press point, which is, I realize, a specific place where police is instructing you to be when covering protests. Is that correct? So we had a similar measure introduced recently in Greece, and we strongly opposed it because clearly it is not useful to anyone. trying to cover protests in the way that we should. So my question is whether there is still such a provision in your country, Marcus, and I'd also like to know about what's going on in other countries. Are you, as photojournalists, supposed to be standing only in specific places when covering protests or not? Thank you.
So I see many hands. Marcus, do you want to answer that first?
Yeah, I think in Finland, the police tried to introduce these press points, but I think journalists really refused to be there or use them. Maybe if there is a big explosion or some kind of terror attack going on or something like that type of happening, but maybe in this kind of demonstration or like where police maneuvers are under media, like media is watching them in these kind of situations, it's impossible to use the so-called press points. And I think nowadays there have been a lot of those climate demonstrations, and police had left us work quite freely, except some cases, but that's how it's nowadays.
Was that an answer enough, Janice? So should I just give the word to, I think, Michael first and Renata and then Simon?
I just wanted to say that we don't have a law that, like in Greece, that forces us to stay at one place, especially on demonstrations. There have been different, as far as I know, different options that police has tried to go. There has been media protection areas, especially on far-right rallies, where one can withdraw and is in a safe area, so you can step back. I personally, I don't want to be restricted to an area, but having a space where you can have like a little chill is very nice and helps a lot sometimes, especially to cool down emotions. During evictions of squatted houses in Berlin, police now blocks down roads far away and only lets people that live in the area in. And now there is press points for journalists and cages and press cages. And this reminds me a lot of the situation in Greece, and reminds me of a restriction of the area you can actually work in. But on the events, if there is not a big police action, you can mostly move freely in the area as you're let in and out. And yeah, I think have also been like ideas of policemen accompanying journalists on protests or stuff like that, which I find completely crazy, because it would make you either a target or it would hinder your free work. So it's a no-go for me. Just wanted to give you feedback, Yanis, for what's going on elsewhere.
Good. Thank you, Mikael. Renate, your hand is up.
Yes, thank you. First of all, welcome, and sorry I wasn't able to be there with you yesterday. I was supposed to give the little welcome. I would just like to say two things. One is many, many years ago, we had a conference on photojournalism. It was called, or it was the question, if it's a dying species. And now we see the incredible problems we have, the challenges you all face on safety, but it's not dying at all. It's very, very lively. And I would like to congratulate all of you for that. I also would like to say the pictures Marcus put in the back, it's a real professional, high quality, and it shows how important it is. And this leads to my second point, which came from Natasha from the NUJ, and there was a little already discussion in the chat. It's a question of support from the general public. And that, of course, is utterly important. Without that support, we will not survive. And here we come to the famous word trust. I'm sure you used it several times already yesterday. This whole project is called Journalism and Trust, and it is so important. We face that at the moment at many levels when it comes to lobbying the European Commission. People don't trust journalists anymore, and we all know why. But I think on photojournalism, it's a completely different issue, because we know you can manipulate the pictures, but still the picture shows the story by itself. So if there's time from all of you, it's just coming up with the question from the chat. What do you do to increase the trust and the support from the public? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renata. Good to have you back. And it was an important question. Simon Chapman, when I see your picture in behind you, I get a question in my mind, but I will ask it after you have said what you want to say. Okay?
Thank you, everyone. Well, I mean, I'll answer the question now. The picture behind me is from the Kill the Bill sort of protest in Bristol earlier this year, which some of you may have heard about. This was the first one. There was a whole series of them, which has led to me having problems, not with the police, but actually with some of the protesters in Bristol. Just to sort of go back on a couple of things, in the NEJ in the UK, we did discuss the value of wearing press vests some time ago, and we decided no, it wasn't good. Excuse me. It would make us a target, particularly from some protesters. It's, you know, we didn't want to be seen as either on the side of the police or the protesters. Wearing a high-vis press vest makes us look like authority of some sort, so we decided against that. In the UK, we got the press card, which is very useful for sort of allowing access in a demonstration, so say in and out of the police cordon. That said, not all police officers always recognise it. There are still problems with persuading all the police in the UK that the press card is valid and that we have a right to, you know, come and go there to cover the event. We've got recently a development in the UK, which my other NEJ colleagues may know more about, is a government committee for the safety of journalists, which the NEJ has a place on. I mean, it sounds like a good idea. I'm not quite sure how much progress has been made. We come to the issue of trust in journalism. So after the Kill the Bill riots, I had a lot of pictures used. And some months later, actually, my house was targeted by anarchists in, you know, it was sprayed with graffiti and articles being put up about me online, which you can easily find, accusing me of being an agent of the state, because some of my pictures show people's faces. So from that point of view, some of the protesters think I'm not trustworthy because either deliberately or inadvertently my pictures provide evidence to the authorities. But that they're making the assumption to me that I should, you know, be on their side, and that's not my role. It's not my role to be on anyone's side at the event, in my view. If someone's, you know, doing something in a public place, you know, I take their photo, I submit it for publication. It's not, I don't see it as my role to start sort of censoring pictures, you know, from a public demonstration. Some of the shots I took were people you couldn't see their faces. Some of them you could. But I put a lot of things in the chat. There's just a general devaluing of both photography and the media, but everyone wants the media to do what they want. I mean, 20 years ago when I started covering protests, I was kind of embedded with some of the protests to a certain extent. That's with what we could term the fluffier end of the protesters, not the hardcore anarchist end. But people were introducing me as, this is our photographer. And I pointed out even then, I'm not your photographer. I'm, you know, from the media, I'm not here to be your photographer. But because, you know, I kind of got on with them and you know, socialized with some of them, it's kind of hard to have a line. And that, in a way that has come back because there's still some of those people around from 20 years ago, which is, I guess, how they found out my address this year and sprayed my house with graffiti. Somehow the information got passed around. But I mean, you know, the media is accused of being fake and biased. But I mean, if we are on one side or the other, then the other side won't trust us. How do we persuade the public that they need to accept that the media will not always be on their side, will not always be saying exactly what they want the media to say, will not he's sort of saying that the government is evil because that's not the way the media works. But yeah, I don't know, how do we get trust back?
Thank you, Simon. Well, if anybody has the answer to that question, raise your hand. What are you doing to get the trust back? And while you think about that, I was thinking about your picture. When I saw it, I know there in France there was some years ago suggestion about the law that photojournalists could not take pictures of the police in action. And then what does anybody of you know how that turned out? Because I guess that law didn't go through. Was it a union? How can we fight against laws that makes the possibilities for being a photojournalist free and working free and openly?
Okay.
Are you raising your hand, Renate?
Yeah,
Yes.
or maybe I can give it a start. It was last year actually, and to be honest, there was an enormous campaign, very much led by our militant French unions, but of course not only by them, by the media at all. And it was quite extreme because it really would have forbidden journalists, photojournalists, to take pictures of police while in action. And you can imagine why. So that was taken back, but now they have come with a similar draft, which is not any better. So it's not out of the wind yet. And we would need to hear our French colleagues to see now what is the next step. They will, I'm sure, fight that as ferociously as they did last year, but it's still with us. This is the challenge. But you have a good point in raising that, because also together with the European level, I think we have been successful indeed.
Okay, Renate and Juklan, if you see other questions you want to raise from the chat, feel free, okay? I don't know, now it's like 14:11. Jonas, you're going on afterwards, aren't you? Can we keep on some minutes, or what do you think?
Yeah, if need be, because I think that the topic of my panel is already perfectly introduced, what unions should do.
Yes.
What are unions doing? So I just need to go on and introduce my panelists later. But yeah, if there are more questions, feel free to go on for another 5 minutes.
Good, thank you. I see Sitara has her hand up. Sitara.
Yeah, I have a last topic, because I say it before, I have write some words down what have to change with dealing with the gender specific violence, what have to change in unions, or what I see what have to change. And yeah, so I think it is a big step that we will be, if we as a community of people who are working in the same industry and sometimes on similar topics, to talking about it more like this today. And I think especially male colleagues who don't have to deal with these topics start to recognize that we are facing this and support us. And when they see something happening, ask us if we need support. That will be a first step. And the male photojournalists need to stand in solidarity with the person affected by this case. And also we need unions and more networks like Women Photographer that give a platform to female and queer journalists. And also a good approach will be to all together demand a 55th quote on assignments. I mean, but for us freelancers, it is hard to demand anything. So we need big communities to stand up for us. And yeah, so we need support to queer, BIPOC and female photojournalists to speak up. If we start to have a loud and public debate, maybe we can encourage queers and women to also speak up and do the same. And yeah, it is really important to say this again.
And thank you for mentioning it. I mean, I said you are going to get the words afterwards, and I'm so happy when young women take the word, okay? And you even got applaud. I think I would like to, if there is no more questions, I would like to give a big thank you to all of the panelists and all the participants. And of course, I see this is a issue that we all get very engaged in. And also, I would like the union and the journalists and everybody to have some space to talk about what the solution and what you have been writing down after this session. So can I just say thank you very much and give the floor to you?
A big thank you from me too to all your panelists and you, Oddrun. As I mentioned before, I think that the topic is quite well introduced, and in many different ways, I think that it's clear that not all unions are paying the same attention, maybe, to the situation that photojournalists are facing, and that even if they do, we don't need to stay with that. We need to go further because things are changing quite fast and challenges are still ahead. So in my understanding so far, I think that the safety issues, the payment, the fair payment issues, and the legal support are three of the main topics that all unions should be facing and should be trying to identify as high priorities in their agendas. But still, there are a lot of variations, let's say, that have to be dealt with by unionists. So today we have two active unionists in our panel. Milan van Boldrik from the Netherlands, an experienced union representative who specializes in labor issues, and she also represents the freelance photojournalists in the union. And we also have Natasha Hirst from NUJ from UK, a photojournalist herself, who is also the vice president of the National Union of Journalists and chairs the Photographers Council and Equality Council. So I'd like to give you the floor, Milan, first, to explain to us what your union is doing to take care of this really hard, sometimes situation that photojournalists are facing. And then we get to you, Natasha, and then we will have another round of discussion, of course, and possibly try to identify some best practices, as you said before, which would also be quite useful for us at EFJ to note. Thank you. Milan, the floor is yours.
Yes, okay. I think we have the photojournalists and the problems they face absolutely at the forefront of our union. And maybe I can show you a little movie where we started with the awareness in society of the problems that photojournalists are facing. Let me see if I can do this.
...10 jaar stil.
En ik vind dat echt niet kunnen in dit vak, wat toch al heel veel van je vergt.
Honderden fotojournalisten legden vandaag hun camera's neer en leverden geen nieuwsfoto's. Ze voeren actie omdat ze vinden dat ze te weinig betaald krijgen.
Er komen minder opdrachten, er is minder geld. Sommige fotografen die krijgen nu een paar tientjes voor een paar uur werk.
Meer waardering voor de fotojournalistiek, daar hoort een goed tarief bij.
So I just showed you this because I just wanted to let you know that we had a strike in 2019, and it was the first time like photojournalists came together on a large scale put the attention to the bad pay and the conditions they are working in. And this film was just kind of a kickoff of like the awareness campaign. And starting from then, we're just really are knocking on every door possible to create awareness, but also to change the policies around payment and safety. And to give you an example, we created this thing called Pers Veilig, and in Dutch it's just press safety, press safety. And that provides like free courses to photojournalists to kind of learn how to protect themselves. But it's also a cooperation with, on the highest level, with police and the government and the unions and the editors of chiefs to talk every like 6-7 weeks about the safety of photojournalists, because through this campaign you can, or through this website, every photojournalist in the Netherlands can just admit if they got a harassment in a demonstration. And it seems to work very well, because now we do have the numbers to every month to show to the government, to the police, to everyone involved what is going on, basically. So it's a really good thing to have one kind of point where everyone in your country, every photojournalist in your country can actually admit where they got harassed. So that is a good thing for us. And also, of course, we go through legal battles. One of those legal battles is, let me see if I can show you a picture of that too. Let me see. I did have a picture of, I just showed, well, I can explain it, but it just shows one of our photojournalists went to court with the help of our lawyer to claim better pay. And I think it is important in those issues that we show to the world that we're all the members of the Union of Photojournalists are behind this one person that goes to court. And we try to make it very visual that we are there constantly with photojournalists to support our colleagues. And so to summarize a little bit, we do have lobby work very intensively. We do provide intensive trainings for photojournalists. They are free for members and non-members. So we keep knocking on every door, and we do go through legal battles also if a photojournalist is able to do that and want to do that, to claim fair pay at the court. And of course, on a higher level, we're discussing fair pay collective contracts for freelancers. You know, it is difficult to do the collective bargaining for freelancers, because we all know that is not possible. But I don't know how it is in other countries, but in the Netherlands, things are changing. We are able now on a certain level to make agreements that have a minimal pay level in collective agreements for freelancers. And I think the minimal pay levels are not as high as we would like to see them, but it is very much a beginning of getting a level playing field for freelance photographers. We're not there yet, but we're getting there. I think maybe for now, that's the start of a discussion, mate.
Thank you, Milan. Just an extra question, because I find it a very important point, what you said about the kind of collective agreements, or at least some agreements on fair pay for photojournalists. Do you do that on a different level compared to what you do for journalists? I mean, do you face these two groups separately?
At the beginning, at the beginning we did, because we noticed the photojournalist base within our union was very vocal, very strong, and they've just first picked up the torch to go for a strike and asked us, please support us. But then we noticed, like very quickly, like about 8 months later, you know what, the journalists and the photojournalists exactly, they have like a lot of the same problems. I mean, safety-wise, they're more a target, so we have to do more training for them. But pay-wise, they have the same problems. So we started to do collective bargaining for the fair practice codes for freelancers actually together. Yeah, but we notice it is difficult because we think a fair pay for photographers need to have an extra addition because of their material, of course. So it's not one-on-one comparable. So yeah, but we do it together, but we do need extra things for the photojournalists because of their expensive material.
Thank you, Milan. We'll get back to this issue. I'm sure we'll get back later because, of course, it's something that is on the agenda of each and every union. This payments issue, especially when we talk about a group of professionals who are mostly freelancing. So we can now go to Natasha. Natasha, the floor is yours now to describe what NUJ, well, you're obviously quite active on this as a union. So we'd like to hear your contribution now.
Thank you very much. It's been really interesting listening to everybody because so many issues have been highlighted that are an increasing concern for members that the NUJ has tried to address in a range of different ways. And I've got to say, when the NVJ did their strike action in 2019, we were incredibly impressed that they'd managed to organise freelance photographers to come together to form that kind of collective action. Certainly in terms of things like rates and low rates and terms and conditions, we work with our big employers where we have members and workplace agreements to try to include freelancers within that collective bargaining process wherever we can. So we had a recent success in Scotland with Reach, which is a big publication, to include freelance rates within that bargaining agenda, even though they didn't have to. But it's very mixed as to whether publishers will engage with the union on freelance rates and freelance contracts. So there's a huge issue that we have at the moment with News UK, who have changed their contracts for freelance photographers and other freelance journalists as well, including copyright grabs, putting indemnity on individuals, and just basically making it incredibly difficult for our members to work in a way that is fair, and then to also have ownership of their work and protection while they're working. But in that respect, the publishers just not engaging with us. It's not engaging with other professional photography bodies either. And although we've been doing as much intelligence gathering from our members and from other networks that we're engaged with, photographers have been resisting signing this new contract, but now people are coming under so much pressure that they've got no choice. They either lose the work or they have to sign. And it's a really, really tough situation for us as a union, but for the whole industry to be trying to address. A number of other things that we've done. So my colleague Simon spoke a short while ago, and he talked about the National Committee for the Safety of Journalists that our General Secretary represents us on. And an action plan has been produced, which involves a number of stakeholders who play a role in trying to protect our rights. And we are hoping that will start to see some of the issues being addressed. The NEJ also has a news recovery plan, because for us to be able to protect and promote the rights of photojournalists, we need to do that for the whole of our journalism industry. And we face similar challenges to the ones that people have been talking about in terms of the lack of trust, the lack of understanding of what we do and why we do it. And there's this sort of, I think, ignorance really about the fact that if you do not have freedom of the press, we as journalists and everybody else as citizens do not have their human rights to the full extent that they should. And so when we're seen as enemies of the people, it's a really, really concerning and chilling situation in terms of the consequences for us as journalists, but also consequences of citizens going about their day-to-day lives in the way that they should be able to. We've done a lot of work with the police, with the National Police Chiefs Council on updating guidance for police to be able to work with journalists, to understand what our role and remit is, to understand what the press card is and what we can do. And then we are also now trying to replicate that process with the private security industry, because our members experience a lot of obstruction from security officers, or when they are perhaps doing their job quite legitimately on public land, but might be photographing something that is happening that is covered by security. So, for example, over the pandemic, gaining access to photograph what was happening at COVID testing sites, photographing vaccinations, getting access to hospitals initially, was incredibly difficult. One of our ongoing concerns is that the pandemic will be used as a smokescreen to continue to restrict access for journalists and photojournalists to be able to document what has been going on in society. I think there's just so many challenges that we try to address as unions. So we do a lot of campaigning, a lot of lobbying. We try to strengthen the relationship between our photographers and the rest of the union, because there's a lot of overlap in terms of the issues that we're dealing with. Something like 46% of our membership are freelancers. Most of our photographer members are freelancers. And so there's a lot of support that goes into dealing with contracts, advising and representing, chasing copyright infringements, chasing lack of payment, and then being able to provide legal support and representation when that is needed. And we've had a number of cases recently where that has happened. But it is really concerning to continue to see this escalation, both in terms of government, public bodies, police, and the general public in just not recognizing the importance of what we do, and obstructing our freedom to work. We, as the Photographers Council, we try to ensure that the rest of the union is aware of the issues that are of concern to our members, and to work jointly in trying to address that. There's, I think we've had our Use It, Pay For It campaign. One of the other issues that we have is obviously publishers who try to take user-generated content. So free content just taken from members of the public or stripped off social media accounts, which then undermines our ability to get paid work and to get professional photography valued and paid for and being used. And so that's another ongoing issue in terms of how our work is understood and valued, and that we are being paid fairly for what we do, because we need to make a living. And if we can't make a living, we can't do our job as journalists, and therefore that fundamentally undermines democracy. in the UK. There are probably quite a few other things that I could talk about, but hopefully that will come up within the questions as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Natasha. And I think that those of you who have followed the workshop yesterday would probably remember that when it comes to this situation with user-generated content or the so-called competition with amateur photographers, I think that it's clear now to everybody that it is the journalistic part of the photojournalist job that surely makes a difference. And I think that very correctly, Renate earlier mentioned that it's becoming more and more evident how important the job of the photojournalist is for the news, which of course includes a paradox, because when it comes to distrust, people seem also to distrust photojournalists as much as journalists. You're more visible than the rest of your colleagues, maybe, and that makes people sometimes too hostile against you or too unwilling to understand why you should always be there when something's going on, which is, of course, the core of the problem. Before I give the floor to all of you for questions, I would like to ask a question myself to Natasha. Is there a gender gap when it comes to payments identified within the photojournalist group?
That is a really good question, and it's one that we've sort of raised within the union that we're trying to gather data on at the moment. The NUJ publishes the rate for the job, so we ask all journalists and photojournalists to submit their rates to us when they're paid for their work, and that helps to give an idea of what our members are being paid for different types of work that they do. But Mike has put the link in the chat, but we're also collecting data around diversity, including gender. And hopefully over time, as that information builds up, we'll get a sense of what that gap is. Anecdotally, there is a gap in terms of the information that we get from our members. And certainly, so gender has been spoken about today and also yesterday, and some of the restrictions that can bring on women who are trying to progress their careers. And there's always the danger that we can get pigeonholed into covering certain types of news or certain types of events or working with certain types of clients because we're women. So the idea that yes, we can gain trust and build rapport and get access to communities that might be harder for male photographers to get access to. But are those all as well paid? I know certainly when I work with community groups or if I'm working with charities, I cannot command the same rate that I could do if I was working in another area of photography or photojournalism. So there are those issues that we're looking at. And also just a slight aside, but linked, one thing that was raised recently on our Photographers Council is when working with the police, the issue of misogyny. So probably you'll be aware of the recent issues in terms of the Sarah Everard case in the UK. As women photojournalists, anecdotally, we're getting information from our members saying if the police are trying to restrict photographers who are covering a protest or public order event, they are going for the female photojournalists before they go for the male photojournalists if they're trying to separate people out. But now we have a situation where there's a huge lack of trust in the police. And as women, if we need support, if we're in a difficult situation and we need to go for support, how can we feel that we can trust the police when all of these issues have been going on throughout our society. So those are other kind of areas of concerns for our members. We need women photojournalists. It's important to have that perspective, but there are so many barriers to women being safe and being able to progress their careers and being paid and treated fairly along the way.
I would like to ask you to Milan, do you also identify such problems through your monitoring?
Yeah, for sure. I must say the problem is what we see is that there's such the small amount of of female photojournalists. So that already says enough that the job is quite not comfortable, and that's a bad thing. I must say about the pay. So we do have a lot of numbers about payments. And we see, of course, the biggest gap with journalists that are on a collective bargaining agreement and freelancers that do the same work, photojournalists or journalists do the same work, but are not on a collective bargaining agreement, but are just freelance. And yeah, that is really our main concern now, because there we see the biggest inequality at the moment. That's although you're doing the same work as a journalist, if you're on a collective bargaining agreement, you get good amount, and if you're not, if you're freelancer, you just get a very poor amount. So I must say that is, in payment-wise, our main concern. But what Natasha is saying is absolutely true. The environment is not safe at the moment for women photojournalists.
Thank you. Meanwhile, I strongly encourage you to check the links that Mike Holderness is sharing with us, because they clearly reflect what outcome should be possible when unions are trying to follow this situation. I would like to ask you, Mike, to clarify, if possible, what you mean by this diversity of the photojournalistic job and how it affects the effort to balance the payments.
It's a statistical problem. When we ask journalists to write, how much do you get paid for 1,000 words? Because that's generally how we're paid in the UK for writing. You can compare all the rates per 1,000, because it's, I mean, obviously each piece is different, but there's a basis for comparison. Whereas photographers will tell us that they got paid so much for a day's work, so much for the mythical half day, which usually takes a day to do, so much for using a picture, and between that and the fact of, frankly, not enough photographers telling us what they've been paid, it's very difficult. I mean, there is a discussion about moving to being paid for a day, though in the UK that might have copyright implications. Many photographers do manage to get what's known as a day rate against space. They get paid to go out and shoot pictures for a day, and that's the minimum they'll get. And if some of the pictures, if many of the pictures are used, they will instead get more for licensing each picture. But it would be easier to compare rates per day. But it's at the moment we just don't have enough data to say statistically. So we come back to the anecdotes that Natasha reported.
Thank you, Mike.
Can I ask something about that? Because I was just wondering, if you don't mind, like how other countries actually determine a fair pay. Because we in the Netherlands, we just look at the collective bargaining agreement for journalists that are on a regular contract, because unions, you know, decided this is what is fair pay for that kind of job. But and we decided that for freelancers, the pay should be that amount plus 50%. So in an hourly rate, you are 150% of or journalist worker on a regular contract. Is that also, Mike, how you guys kind of look at it?
We have regrettably few house agreements in the UK.
Okay.
The Guardian just uprated its rate per 1,000 words by 5% since 2012. So on one hand, this is a victory that the freelance chapel there, chapel is the NUJ unit of organisation in an office. The journalists at the Guardian did manage to get freelance rates included. They did not manage this time to get an increase in the minima for use of photographs. So I'm urgently seeking to talk with the representatives of the union at the Guardian. There was a deal with the Express, which didn't mention freelancers. In general, newspaper owners are very, very reluctant to talk about anything to do with freelancers because they don't have to in law.
Yeah, we recognize that. Yeah.
So, and because on a point of principle, they won't be regulated, or they won't negotiate when they're not forced to by law. So that's a very, very long-term campaign to get freelancers recognised as workers. And in the UK, we suffer from the fact that as soon as you mention freelancers being recognised as workers, certain politicians will go, "That sounds terribly European. We're not doing that." We suffer from the touchstone of government policy being that whatever it does shouldn't be European. Clean rivers apparently are European in the news recently. So I've lost my track. Was there another part of your question?
No, this is okay. I was just wondering how you then, because you said it is difficult to gather data for what is a fair pay from the photojournalist. So I was just wondering how other methods you use to kind of estimate what is a fair pay. So your where you want to go to, basically.
Right. And what I do with the rate per job is basically gather data on what is paid. And because of freelancers not having workers' rights, we are constrained. We're able to produce a freelance fees guide, but I would be prosecuted for behaving like an American railway baron, as a monopoly. Right. If it wasn't that the fees guide was based on reports of what is paid. And we are now we need to find new ways to encourage more union members and others to share information on what they are being paid. It's very difficult during lockdown when you can't stick a clipboard in somebody's face and say, "Tell us what you got last week." So we have union organizing issues there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any questions to our panelists, or are there any suggestions addressed both to panelists and to other attendants of this webinar, and even EFJ, to try and create a list of priorities that should be there for the unions when it comes to supporting photojournalism? I think that the awareness issue mentioned is clearly an important one. And I also think that when it comes to the safety of photojournalists, some training should be there too for the unions to take care of. But I'd also like to hear your ideas about what unions should try to provide to their photojournalist members. Anyone who would like to?
Shall I come in?
Yeah, sure, Natasha.
I think I mean one of the things in the UK in terms of the trade union movement generally is skills training. And the NUJ does a lot of that, but there are some things that we might not have the resources or the expertise to deliver as well as other organisations can that are already doing that. So there are organisations in the UK that deliver courses around safety, but also trauma. So PTSD is it's an area of concern for our members if they have perhaps been attacked in the course of doing their work, or they've witnessed traumatic events. That there is training available and support available for members there. And I think it's an area that as a union we need to explore a bit further in terms of how can we make sure that our members have either free or affordable access to the training that they need to do their job and to stay safe while they're doing that. My colleague Anne has put a link in the chat, Roy Pet Trust, who deliver that sort of training. And we do have a number of our members who are very active about promoting safety when covering public events. And one of our branches has been looking at the potential of creating a training video for our members with kind of key ideas for how they can protect themselves when they're working, and making sure that they're well networked, because we need to protect each other when we're out there and we're working. We need to have each other's backs at the same time.
Thank you, Natasha. Any other idea about the training part? I think that online safety is also an issue that photojournalists should be able to get support with. And I know that there have been some initiatives, even by EFJ in the past about this. And this is also a threat that photojournalists do have to deal with, I'm afraid. Yes, Audron, thank you.
Yes, I just have a case. I talked to a colleague in US, United States of America, and he told me that the Department of Justice had formulated a paper, kind of a permission, that photographers could use to show the police at demonstrations or close to official buildings that they had the permission to work. I mean, have you heard about that? And is that something that is happening in Europe? And also, is it a good suggestion or not? Because I think, what about the press card? Do we need another permission? So I don't know if you've heard anything about that.
No, but I must say, is that like a different press card kind of thing? Like you have, like photojournalists have two press cards, just a regular press card and a police press card, so they can work within the corridor, or is this something else?
On the way, he sent me some links. I could look upon them and maybe share some of it, but it was like, I think maybe if it was a special demonstrations or if there are special buildings, you have to apply to work.
That's weird. No, haven't heard of that.
I think that is a step back.
That's a step back, yeah.
Yes.
And devalues the press cards.
Yes. So we must not that happen in Europe, okay? If that is the cute line.
Maybe I have a question for our Dutch colleague, Milan. I know your initiative, the cooperations with police, that the police really deal with the issues of journalists who faced attacked. I just wonder whether this initiative can be replicable by other countries, and how you manage to, reach this agreement and ask the police, the authority really give emphasis to follow up closely, immediately, the cases facing by journalists. And also, I know that you also have on board the media employer, and how you manage that. And so far, has it been a very effective way of ensuring the safety of journalists?
Well, to start with the publishers, I mean, we really fight with them about everything. But on this issue, we're actually on the same page, because it's this about the safety from their workers and the safety for journalists. So safety is a thing we can shake hands on, because both parties are just agreeing that this is something that should stop, of the attacking of journalists. So that's a good thing. Huh? You can find common ground in that. So that was not the difficult part. What was more difficult, but we did it together, is a strong lobby towards the government that we needed a broader support from the government money-wise, but also policy-wise, that they would recognize this corporation persveilig, press safety, as an official institution. And they, of course, were very happy that the unions and the publishers could actually work together on this safety issue. And the police was also on board quite quickly, because journalists face a lot of attack, but at the same time, police also face a lot of attack from demonstrations. So in that order, in that sense, the talks and the cooperation was okay. The more challenging thing was to get enough money so we can train everyone and not only non-members. But since the lobby is very strong with this, the government actually provided the funds. And it does work, because it is, even if you're not very close to the union, because everyone is involved, you kind of know you know where to find the door to this institution and to ask for help and to monitor or to sorry, the English, how to what's the word? I don't know, but if something happens to you, you can go to this page and you write down very quickly what happened to you, and someone will contact you. So it's not only that we have numbers, it's also support.
Maybe just one additional question to that. Do you also have some kind of dialogue or even some training with the police forces to let them understand the work of journalists and also photojournalists, especially involved?
Yes, because we do talk then with the police on a very high level, but trust me, it is a problem on the floor. And that is, all photojournalists and journalists face this. You know, with the Extinction Rebellion demonstrations that are going on at this moment, we do notice that the officers high in rank know how to treat journalists, but it is a problem on the floor. But so we face, I think, the same problems as everyone, but the access to a voice in the police force is easier because of this institution. The thing is, the problem is that it needs to trickle down, and that is always a problem, it seems.
Yeah, indeed, and I think the biggest challenge that we face is the normalization of it. Okay, so people seem to believe that it's part of our job description to have this situation whenever we are covering some protest or demonstration. It's not, obviously not. So I would like to thank you, Milan and Natasha, for the very useful contributions, and Juklan and Renate, we'll get back to you now for a wrap-up maybe of this workshop.
Thank you, Yanis, and also thank you for Udrum for having moderated the two excellent sessions. And also thank you for all of you attending this webinar yesterday and today. And I think it's without doubt, based on the discussions that we had yesterday and today, you know, photojournalists are still very important, and there are lots of challenges, as we discussed today: safety issues, legal barriers, and also career barriers that we discussed yesterday. There are lots of room for improvement in terms of inside the professions, but also for support from both the union, the public, and as emphasized by my colleague Renata, the issue of trusts and quality. And I think there's still a very big role for photojournalists to play to provide the public, you know, the story, inspiring story, to tell the truth. And I just want to mention that this will be the last webinar for our 2-year projects. So we will have the final conference, which we hope to organize in Spain in March physically, if the COVID situation allowed, on this. So we will gather all the key points and also issues discussed, in particular today's webinar focusing on photojournalism. And in relation to what discussed today, also on in terms of safety issues, we mentioned a lot of training. The EFJ has also a new project on safety for journalists. And as you might have seen in the chat room before, I have already shared the survey to you. And if you're a journalist yourself, it will be very good if you could answer the survey. And if not, it will be good to also spread with your colleagues and to also find out the status of journalists, all journalists, photojournalists, freelancers in particular, actually, and on their safety issues, and also the support that they have or they don't have, so that we can also provide a kind of a recommendation at the end of projects. And as a part of project, we also have some safety training for journalists at the national level. And one will be in the Netherlands with our Dutch colleague, and also in Germany, and in Sweden, and in Croatia, and in France also. So please take a look at the survey and do it and spread it. And also I will share with you also, we have also some online training courses, risk assessment, which my colleague Laura just now posted, and it's also free to do it. And we also have a lot of handbook on this. So so if you are really thinking about training, maybe as a union organizing training for your journalists, get in touch with us, that we could maybe provide assistance on you, or experts or materials that we already have. Or if you are individual journalists looking for training on safety issues, then we can provide this as well. And also, last but not least, as Ricardo mentioned yesterday, the EFJ also, and also many of our national union, monitoring attacks on journalists. So if you are facing any harassment attacks or violations of your media freedom, please report it to your union or associations, and also report it to us. The EFJ is with a group of media freedom coalitions, really monitoring the attacks, gathering all the statistics in the EU and candidate countries to really push more like at the European policy and actions, to put more emphasis and push member states to do more to protect the journalists. As you might have read that in September, the Commission already have a series of recommendations focusing on the safety of journalists, which we welcome very much. But of course, now it's time for you to add into the pressure to push for member states, to push for your country to really implement those national actions. So that's why it's so important that we gather here together to share the good practices in your countries, in terms of whether concerning our payment issue, but also on the safety issues, like what you are doing with the authority, the police, is to push for the safety of journalists. So so if you have any issue related to this topic and want more information, please feel free to let me know. And maybe Renata, you want to add something?
Yes, thanks, Joklan. Thanks for this little summary. Also for you all to know that normally we do a little takeaway. So we will have a press release with takeaway and maybe some interesting links for you, specifically the one Joklan mentioned on the safety recommendation. Because this safety recommendation, which we did a lot of work of lobbying for to make it look good, will only work if it's implemented at member state level. Unfortunately, something that we always face with whatever regulation or recommendation we have at European level. Unfortunately, it's not for the UK anymore, but we have a very similar safety recommendation on the level of Council of Europe, and it's the same. Member states, they say, yes, they adopt it, and then they don't do anything. So I think it's also up to the unions to push their governments to remind them, you have adopted that, so please do something. But I just wanted, well, also, first of all, also thank you, Yanis, for this last very important panel. I think in the end, we are representing unions and associations, and in the end, it's that what matters, what our unions are doing at national level, at regional level, how they help our members. We do not always work for photojournalists as much as we should. We know that it's a very important part of the profession. And in a way, I was talking about this dying species, but I think with changing technology and with more and more visual storytelling these days, there is a new niche, and that has to be explored. But I just wanted to add two last points. One is on trust, as we has been a sort of green line throughout the seminar, rightly so, because this is part of our trust seminar. And I just want to quote a journalist, Daniel Etter, who said the biggest challenge we are facing is the struggle to be believed. The struggle to be trusted and to be taken as a reliable source of information is our biggest challenge. And Daniel Etter is a photojournalist. The digital expert group of the EFJ is dealing very much with this issue of trust. And so is also our project we have on media press councils. And so if you have any issues regarding to trust, please send it to us, because then we will deal with it either via the press council's work or via our digital expert group, because as we all said before, without trust, we will not survive. The second point I just wanted to add is also something that's been, especially in this last session, mentioned a few times, is the issue of collective bargaining. We all know that it's so difficult for our unions to do collective bargaining on behalf of freelancers, and mainly so because the competition authorities say, no, you are a little company, you cannot be a monopoly almost, you cannot do collective bargaining on behalf of self-employed or on behalf of micro enterprises. So fortunately, DG Competition has finally realized that this is complete nonsense, that it cannot be, and it's actually against the spirit of competition law, that the smaller ones who need protections are now being used as enterprise, and the opposite is taking place. So there has been a public consultation. The EFJ and 20 of its member unions have participated in which we are trying to convince the Commission that there should be an exemption for solo self-employed. And we just had a discussion with the Commission, and it seems at the moment, due to, of course, big lobbying of the employer side, that the Commission may go ahead, but with an option which is not satisfying for us. It would exclude micro enterprises. But of course, our photographers also work for micromedia, and then this would, we find, being an unlevel playing field. But putting it short, the second public consultation will come out on the 8th of December, and we will all remind our unions, and of course the EFJ will fill in a second response to this consultation, and we will work very hard that we get an option that is fair for all self-employed and that would allow the unions finally to do collective bargaining for them. So I think that's all. We had a lot of discussions. Of course, normally we would have been in Montenegro. You have seen the situation there. I think it would have been excellent to also help our Montenegrin colleagues who are still in a very different situation. So thank you also for the presentation there. And we would have had 1.5 days because we had much more issues to deal with in depth. We wanted to talk more on this question of manipulation. I mean, we have so many deep fakes and issues that very much concern the question of photography and trust. But we did it like that, and we hope to see many of you, hopefully really lively, in Malaga, where we put it all together and where we will have a focus on gender. So don't don't be afraid. The gender issue, diversity issue is very much on the top of our agendas. So that's all. We finished in time. Thank you very much to everybody and see you all hopefully sooner or later. Bye bye.
Thank you.